Hello, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, Agile Portfolio Management, the secret sauce for sustainable business growth. My name is Rachel Pinchas, and I am part of the marketing team here at Keyden. Before we get started, I wanted to run through a few housekeeping items. The webinar is scheduled for a full hour and will be 45 minutes of presentation, followed by a generous 15 minutes to answer all of your burning questions at the end. PDU credit information will also be provided at the completion of the presentation, so stay tuned for that. All lines are on mute, so if you do have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to submit those in the Q&A box, and we will cover those at the end of the presentation. As always, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording, along with the slides, will be sent following the presentation, usually within 24 hours, so be sure to check your inbox for that tomorrow. Today, we have a very special presenter, Andy Jordan. Andy is a global thought leader in the project management space. He is a LinkedIn learning instructor, an author, and a keynote speaker. If you haven't already, be sure to check out his courses available on LinkedIn by searching LinkedIn Learning for those valuable, insightful courses. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy to talk about today's webinar agenda. Andy, take it away.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you everybody for joining us. I really appreciate it. Really important topic today. Really excited to be talking to you about it. And you can see this is the kind of stuff we're going to be talking about. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because guess what? You're about to go through this. So we're going to talk a little bit about history, then sort of try and sort of change your mindset a little bit and get you to think a little bit differently, and then talk about how this concept of agile portfolio management can actually help us transform the business. And then, of course, give you some practical guides as to how we make it happen. And then Rachel will give us an overview of how Keyden can support that. And as she mentioned, we'll try and make sure there's plenty of time for questions. So just as I get into this, how did we get here? I just want to sort of step back for a second and talk about the title of this, Agile Portfolio Management. And in particular, I want to focus on the Agile piece. Because if I say to any project management audience about Agile these days, you're going to think Scrum and Kanban and sprints and stand-ups and all that kind of stuff. And that's really valuable and really important, and it's a critical part of how we deliver projects. But it's not quite what I'm talking about right now. If you're familiar with Agile at all, then you may also be familiar with some of the scaled Agile approaches. SAFe is the most common or most popular ones, the scaled Agile framework, but there's a number of others. And that talks a lot about taking the concepts of Agile project delivery and applying them to higher levels of the organization, with strategic planning and of course, portfolio management is part of that. And that's kind of sort of what I'm related to today, but again, it's not quite the same. So have a little bit of an open mind and don't think of Agile portfolio management as what you might have come across before. Think of it as a little bit differently, and we'll sort of explain as we go through what we exactly mean by that. So let's start a little bit with a little bit of a history lesson as to how we got here, specifically how we got here in terms of portfolio management. It is, in most places, a top-down process. It's something that leadership or executives apply on top of the project and program management framework, but it's not really fully integrated into how the organization operates. It's an overlay, it's an add-in. It's not a core integrated part of how an organization goes from the process of setting goals and objectives to achieving benefits. It's just something that is kind of sort of around it. It's also something that is largely historic. It's largely focused more on what's happening in the rearview mirror as opposed to what's happening through the windshield. It looks at what's happened. It looks at reporting. It looks as if we are trying to find a better way of consolidate and report on what's happening in our projects. And I don't want to suggest that's not important, but there's a lot more to management than just producing reports and looking at them and going, ooh, that's not good. So we have to find a little better way of approaching things. Part of that for a lot of organizations is this concept of organizational agility. And now we're getting a little bit more to where we talk about agile portfolio management. This is the kind of agile we're talking about now. Organizational agility is becoming a more mainstream, more accepted approach within businesses. And essentially, it's about creating a business that is capable of adjusting and adapting to changing circumstances. We know the world's getting faster. We know technology is changing what's feasible pretty much on a daily basis. We know that competition's increasing, it's becoming more global, traditional industry barriers are being broken down, and we've got things that we never even imagined before. The concept that you can have a refrigerator in your home that can go online and order your groceries for you and they just show up at the door. You know, it's something that even 10 years ago we'd never have dreamed would be realistic, but it's happening. This is changing how organizations operate. It's changing the speed of change. It's changing the way that they have to pivot and adjust to changing circumstances. And they have to do that with minimal disruption. They have to make sure they're still getting a good return on their investment. And that's where this organizational agility piece is coming in. But we're still making sure that a lot of this is happening at the tactical levels, not the strategic levels. And think of it in terms of changing the way the work is being done, as opposed to changing what it is that we should be doing. So when a competitor makes a product launch that we weren't expecting, our immediate reaction is, oh, how can we get to market quicker? Or how can we add in more features that they don't have? Or how can we find a way to launch a product at a lower price point and undercut them? We don't necessarily think, okay, our competitors now coming into this space, we weren't expecting that, but does that mean there's new opportunities? Are they leaving another space for us? Or is there a better approach that we can do and reposition ourselves as being the quality player instead of the value player, or a niche player instead of mass market? We're not doing that yet. We're not thinking strategically. We're still focusing at a tactical level in terms of how does a project have to change to incorporate something? And that's a problem because, frankly, it's not working. Forget the colored graphics on the right for a second, I'll get to those. But just think about what's happening on the left-hand side here and see whether or not some of this is actually sort of resonating in your organization. Are you finding that you're not living up to your expectations, whether those are the expectations that you impose on yourself or your leaders and your executive team impose, or is it what your customers expect? And when I mean customers, yes, the people who are buying your products and services, but also that larger group of stakeholders, you know, the community at large, your board of directors, even you as employees. Are you feeling as though your organization is achieving everything it could? And I guess the answer, at least partly, is no. Change is still taking too long for anybody. If you're involved with project delivery, you know change is still way too disruptive, and there's a heck of a lot of it. You know your executives and your sponsors are saying, you know, this is taking too long. We need to adjust more quickly. We need to pivot. We need to minimize disruption. You know, all these key words that they keep throwing about, and it's just not happening. And when it does happen, we might find that a week or so later we're changing again because we didn't make the right change. We didn't do the right kind of analysis. We just sort of did a knee-jerk reaction, which still took too long, and then ended up making the wrong adjustment. And now we're further away from where we need to be. And organizations are still complaining that there's a lack of clarity. They're not clear on what's happening, and they're not clear on what should be happening. This is a problem. It translates into real bottom line problems for organizations that at the extreme threaten their existence. Moving to the right-hand side here, inconsistent delivery. You know, some of your projects might be really successful. Other projects may be total failures, and you've no real idea what the difference was between the two. And when things do go wrong, do you find there's a lack of accountability? I'm guessing you do. Think about benefits realization. Is anybody in your organization actually held accountable for achieving the X million dollars of savings or revenue or market share or whatever it might be that they claimed in the business case that led to the project being approved? It might happen in one or two key projects, but I'm betting that most of your projects have very little or no accountability for that. Our organizations tend to have the wrong focus. We're very good at delivering against the goals and objectives that we should have had a year or so back, but we don't have anymore. There's often a lack of visibility. The answer, the most honest answer that can be given to an executive saying, where are we at with this, is, I'm not sure, I don't know, because we don't have that immediate real-time insight into what's going on. There's still a long time to solution, and I don't mean long time to solution from the start of the project. I think about it more in terms of how long it takes to get to solution from when that problem or opportunity is first identified. That's the real measure of success. From the point in time where you say, hey, this technology advancement means we can now do stuff that we've never been able to do before. We can deliver something to our clients that is truly awesome. If that takes a year, it doesn't matter that the project was delivered in 6 months. It matters that it took 6 months for that project to be approved. That's the real key. We have to reduce the time from identification to solution, and we're not doing it. We're just putting more pressure on project teams to deliver faster while taking longer over the decisions. And all of this contributes to an unacceptable return on investment, ROI. If you think about how organizations are structured and how they're financed, there's very little money available to make a difference. The vast majority of the money that is generated by an organization is plowed back into the operations of that business, to the salaries of employees, to the raw materials, to the marketing, to sales, whatever it might be. There's only a small percentage that's available for projects. And of that small percentage for projects, a whole bunch of those projects you don't have any choice on. The regulatory stuff, the keep the lights on, the maintenance, all of that has to happen anyway. So that reduces even further the amount of money you can actually spend on difference makers. And some of those difference makers were funded in previous years and they're still continuing now. So that takes more of the money away. So you may only have 1, 2, 3, 4% of your total budget available to invest in projects that have to generate a real return. That's a lot of pressure on that money to perform, and it's not happening. And that's a huge issue that we just have to address. So that's what's leading to this new concept. A famous man, Albert Einstein, you've certainly heard of him, said the significant problems that we face today cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. Now, I'll freely admit he wasn't talking about portfolio management, but that's not the point. The points he's making are absolutely valid in 2019. The world is changing so fast that what's led us to this point isn't going to get us past this point. We have to think differently. We have to be innovative. So I'm going to pause for a second right now, and we've got a polling question for you. You can see the question itself on screen, and there you go. You will have just seen popping up now. Rachel has put up a list of options for you to decide. So we'll give you a few seconds to read through those options and tell us which statement best describes your approach to portfolio management. And you see there's 5 different choices there. So Rachel, let me bring you in at this point while everyone's reading through and deciding what they want to say, and ask you, what do you think we're going to get? I'm hoping that that we're not going to get 100% of people saying, yeah, we don't do it at all.
Yeah, definitely. I hope that's not the case. I do think there will be a handful of people that probably haven't made it that far with portfolio management yet, but I think we'll find most people kind of in the middle there, with either it's just reporting purposes or they're trying to do it, but it's not very effective, I think.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And thinking about it, I should probably hope that we don't have 100% of people saying we're embracing modern portfolio management approaches and it's really effective, because if they do, then I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about for the next half an hour. But all right, we'll just give everyone a few more seconds, and then Rachel will close down the poll and we'll show the results to everybody. So if you haven't voted yet, your last few seconds. There we go. I see the polls disappeared. There we are. So, well, that's a relief. So we have the largest category. We say we do it, but it's really just reporting. So you've probably been sitting there nodding at some of the stuff I've already said. So that was, where are we? 36% of you. So that's more than 1 in 3. Then next, we do portfolio management, but it's not that effective. You are not alone there. I mean, obviously 25% of people on this call are saying that, but that's something I come across all the time. 22% of you saying they don't do it at all. Be interesting to hear your stories in the questions as to whether you've tried and failed, or don't think it's necessary, or still trying to figure out how to do it. 11% of you saying, hey, we do portfolio management. It's somewhat effective. So that's good news, but clearly still some room for improvement. And 5% of you who gave us the most positive response there, saying that you're doing it in a modern style, and you're really pleased with the results. So I'd love to hear your questions and comments as well as to what you found worked well and what didn't. So let me just close that down, and we can go back to the presentation. So if I can get the slides to advance, there we go. So think differently, as Einstein sort of put it, or to paraphrase him. So this is what I want you to think about. Some of this will resonate from the current situation, the where we're at stuff, because it is top down still. We need to think from the top of the organization all the way through. But now it needs to be strategically focused. So we need to have portfolio management that is truly integrated into how an organization operates. From the point where the board of directors sit with the executive team and everybody agrees on what it is that the other 5, 6, whatever it is, major goals and objectives that will be set for the next 12 months, and how those goals and objectives contribute to the 3, 5, 7, 10-year strategy. From that point forward, portfolio management has to be involved. Whether or not it's identifying potential projects that can help to achieve those goals, whether it's developing true objective business cases as opposed to sales pitches that will make those projects real or lead to them being reviewed and approved, whether it's that approval process itself, and I apologize for the noise in the background, it won't last, whether it's the approval process where we actually model the different mixes of projects and decide what's the best mix, whether it's the execution of that work, or critically, whether or not it's the process of actually achieving the benefits. Portfolio management has to be involved all the way through. That's what is effectively the scope of Agile Portfolio Management. From the start of planning to the completion of the realization of the benefits, all of that has to be actively, adaptively, agilely managed from a strategic standpoint by a single portfolio management function. And all of that has to happen with the key focus on optimizing the return on investment. We're making sure we're getting the best possible return. And don't think of that ROI just in financial terms. Yes, that's the key thing to think about, but not all of you work in the private sector. Not all of you are working in organizations that are motivated by money directly. But even if you're working in government, you want to make sure you're getting the maximum return on investment. You could argue, especially if you're working in government, you want to make sure you're providing the best possible services to your constituents for the least amount of taxation dollars taken in. If you're working in a not-for-profit or charity sector, it's absolutely critical that you do the most you can with the money you've got. That's return on investment. Even in the private sector, you shouldn't be focusing just on the dollar return. You should be focusing on things like NPS, the Net Promoter Score, that is a modern measure of customer satisfaction, because that's an indicator of long-term value. That's an indicator that your customers like you, they're pleased with the services and products, they're likely to stay, they're likely to recommend you to other people, and your market share will expand. That is an indirect measure that will lead to financial gain. That is a form of return on investment. So you have to think strategically around all that stuff, which in turn contributes to this long-term value. We're not interested in just achieving our goals and objectives for the next 12 months. I know it seems like that sometimes, but there's a long-term strategy. There's a long-term plan. We have to make sure we're creating sustainable value for our organizations. And that's what you can achieve when you manage everything from the top and you manage everything in an integrated way. And finally, on this slide, we have to make sure that we're prioritizing innovation and time to solution. I talked about time to solution a little bit before, the time it takes from the realization that there is an opportunity or a threat to the delivery of the solution and the acceptance of that solution in the marketplace. But let's talk a little bit about innovation. You can't innovate with 100% of your budget because it's too risky. But you do have to innovate as much as you can within the limited amount of money you've got available. You can't just focus on cost reduction because there's limited benefit from that. You can't change the world. You can't take your profitability levels to an order of magnitude higher just by cutting costs. There's limited benefit from it because there's always going to be costs associated with running the business. You can't just incrementally improve your products and services because that's not going to change the world. If you think about any major technological advancement, or even going back into to older times, any major advancement in human civilization, let's get dramatic and big here, it's innovation that's driven that. It was the wheel. It was the ability to work metals. It was the Industrial Revolution, the development of mass production. Up to more modern times, you could argue, the most recent development of that was the smartphone, the Apple-driven iPhone revolution. Whatever it is, innovation is what changes the world. Innovation is what takes you to that next level, at whatever scale you want to think. So you have to prioritize innovation as part of this. It's a key part of sustainable success. All right, nice idea, but how the heck do we do that? What are the different pieces of it? And I'm going to drill into these in a little bit more detail over the next few minutes. But there are 4 key cornerstones, pillars, whatever you want to call them, to this process: innovation, investments, backlogs, and integration. And we're going to talk a little bit about each of these. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. You can see it here. I'm just going to drill into to the first of those, which is innovation, and specifically strategic innovation. And the little let me try that again in English. The little subheading there, I think is critical. Never stand still. Always be looking to move forward. If you're not innovating, if you're not moving forwards, you're moving backwards. So the first thing you need to do, look for these opportunities, look for the next big thing. And big doesn't have to be massive. You don't have to invent the next iPhone, but the next big thing that is bigger than what you usually do, bigger than an incremental service improvement or product improvement or cost reduction. Look for something that no one else has that you can deliver. And look for that all the time, because the world is changing constantly. What was impossible yesterday is the norm today. I don't know when the last time was that you bought a television, but in one product cycle of televisions, we've gone from high def to 4K and now 8K. That kind, and some people in the Far East, they're actually sort of experimenting with 16K, which is, it's mind-blowing. But that's happened in one product cycle. Things are changing so fast that no one else had that. Someone's inventing it. Someone's inventing the next thing beyond it. That's how quickly things are moving. You have to always look for those opportunities, because if you can find just one, you can change the world, or at least your organization. You have to focus. You have to make sure that it's not just a new technology. It's not just a new gimmick. It actually has a purpose. Specifically, it's delivering customer value and business value. Something that is good for your customer is really important, but it also has to be good for you. You can't lose money on everything you sell and make it up in volume unless it's a loss leader that's going to help you develop, get that market share, and then make money down the road. That's fine. But you have to make sure you're focused just as much on business value as customer value. You have to understand what's happening. You can't just think, hey, this is a good idea, let's do it. Let's understand, how is it evolving? How is it innovating? Is this an opportunity we can take advantage of? Is this something we should just pass by? What's happening to the environment, to the technologies? Not just what's happening now, but what is this leading on to? Where is this going? Is this the end point, or is this just the start of a new revolution? You have to continuously redefine. And then, of course, you have to commit to it. You can't be a little bit invested in innovation. When you find that smart idea, when you find that new opportunity, you have to go all in, from the top of the organization to the bottom of the organization, and deliver what you say you're going to deliver to the market when you say you're going to deliver it. That's the only option you have if you're going to successfully innovate. Now let's talk about investments, because none of that's going to happen without money. Think about a portfolio in financial terms for a minute. Forget about portfolio management in project sense. Most of you hearing this will have some kind of financial portfolio, a 401k, an RRSP if you're in Canada, but some kind of pension or retirement funding. You might have something where you invest for kids' education. You may have something where you just save some money for a vacation or a major event that's coming up in your life. That's a portfolio of investments, cash investments, bonds, stocks and shares, whatever it might be. You don't care too much about the performance of an individual stock or an individual share in that portfolio. You care a lot more about the performance of the overall portfolio. Are you, or is your financial advisor, getting the kind of return on the investment that you expect, that you need to be able to retire comfortably? If not, you'll dump one share, you'll dump one stock, you'll buy something else, you'll replace it, you'll keep that level of investment where it needs to be. That's how we need to think about portfolio management in our project context. We have to be willing to adjust and adapt. We have to be prepared to say, this project's not working, kill it, or at least shelve it for a while, move on to something that can generate a better return, because it's that overall portfolio return that is what matters. So a simple process here: fund, monitor, adjust. Commit your investments to the initiatives that are going to make the difference. They're going to deliver innovation. Monitor what's happening, address the variances where you can. And if you get to the point where an investment's not capable of delivering the return you need, make an adjustment. Kill it and move on. Don't throw good money after bad. I know you've heard this a million times before on project management, but in portfolio management, the numbers are bigger, the risks are bigger, the importance of this is even higher. You have to do this, and you have to do it quickly. Let's talk about backlogs for a minute. And backlogs is something that you may be familiar with from Agile Project Management. And it's really a similar sort of concept. And this is really not complicated. Everyone gets sort of a little bit hung up on portfolio backlogs, but you shouldn't, because it really isn't difficult. Think about the planning process. Organizations are starting to plan on shorter cycles now, typically quarterly. But they're still going to have to set goals and objectives for a year, and they're still going to have to set funding targets for a year, because that's how money works. That's how finance functions work. And that's okay. So the first thing we do is we build our project portfolio. We build our list of proposed projects, and we approve the ones that we think are going to go forward. And then we prioritize based on the biggest contribution, the ability to fund, the resources available, the distribution of work across the organization, the risks and the distribution of those risks, etc. We prioritize a whole bunch of stuff. And some of those projects, roughly a quarter, if we're going on a quarterly basis, will start work straight away. We'll start these projects, we'll go forward, and everything's good. The rest of those projects will sit and wait for resources to be available. That is your initial backlog. It's, if we do, I don't know, 40 projects for the year, we start 10 of them, then number 11 in the priority list is top of the backlog, followed by number 12, 13, etc. But then we actively manage that backlog. We review what's in the backlog, and we review what's in progress. And if we need to, we make adjustments. We shift things around. And then we repeat that process, not just every quarter, but every time some significant event happens that might change how we think about our portfolio, might change what's possible, might change what we have to deliver to the market. We repeat this process so that the next project to start is always the one that can make the biggest difference, deliver the most value. And if need be, we stop working on the projects that we're already working on in order to shift focus to something in the backlog that has become more critical. That's perfectly okay. It's active management. It's optimizing the performance of the portfolio. It's what we should be doing. And then integration, the source that brings all this together, if you like, the piece that makes sure that the whole organization is working smoothly together, delivering success. It starts with leadership, clearly. They decide the goals and objectives. They're responsible for approving initiatives. So they have ownership of this what, why, when, and how. But it ends at the bottom of the organization, where the work gets done, where the teams are, where people are delivering performance to the market. That's what many of you, I suspect, are managing right now, your project and program managers who are looking after those teams that are actually doing the work. Portfolio management has to connect those together. And I know the arrows sort of suggest that this is only going down, but this is two-way communication. This is something that is happening across the entire organization. We're translating what's happening into the adjustments that we need. We're translating shifting needs into changing actions, changing work. So the portfolio management is acting as a communications hub for everything here, not just within a single vertical, but for every single strategic initiative, every single day of the year, and for every single element of the portfolio lifecycle from the start of planning to the end of benefits realization. This is a really simple slide graphically, but this represents a fundamental shift in how many organizations are structured and managed. Portfolio management becomes the hub of every single strategic project action that happens in your organization. And it has to be that tightly integrated if you're going to successfully deliver agile portfolio management. It's only that single point of control, that single point of ownership, that will allow that rapid adjustment, that pivoting that's necessary to truly deliver an agile approach. And all of this is not just because it's kind of sort of important, which it is, but because it helps to transform the business. And trust me, your business needs to transform. Agile portfolio management is an enabler. It's something that allows an organization to fundamentally change. It's an enabler of improved customer satisfaction. If you're delivering better solutions in less time and with more consistency, then your customers are going to like you a lot more because you deliver what you say you're going to deliver, and you deliver something that they need. Your staff, your employees, your colleagues, they're going to love the fact that you're actually delivering streamlined capabilities that are actually making a difference, as opposed to automating something that nobody cares about. We're actually optimizing value. That's a really good thing. And obviously, if you're being more efficient and more effective in the way you execute work, then you're more likely to do the right work in the right way every single time. And that, in turn, is driving business transformation. Now, I know business transformation is something that you hear a lot these days, especially in the context of digital transformation. And it can be one of those things where you just roll your eyes and go, oh, great, not another one of those. Well, yeah, another one of those, because here's one of the projections that really sticks with me. The forecast is that by 2022, which sounds like a long way away, but is really only a little over 2 years off. By 2022, the global spend on digital transformation is going to be $2 trillion annually. 2 trillion, $2,000 billion. That's a massive amount of money on a digital transformation. And digital transformation is not just technology, it's changing the way that organizations operate because of technology or through technology. So that's exactly aligned with what we're talking about here in terms of agile portfolio management. So we have to find a way to create a business that is capable of continuously reinventing itself in response to these new emerging opportunities, most of which are technologically driven, hence the digital transformation element. So we have to make sure that as new emerging technologies arrive or disruptive technologies arrive, we recognize which ones we need to respond to, which ones we need to just monitor, and which ones we ignore. And then we need to make the right actions more quickly. We have to make sure that we believe in our ability to deliver consistently. We have to make sure that we've got repeatable processes that are still able to adapt to changing circumstances. And that's difficult because repeatable processes imply consistency, imply the same repeated approach. And yet we need to adapt. So we need to build that adaptability, that agility, agile portfolio management, into what we are, into how we operate, which means the entire organization has to be agile. It's not a case of working across silos. It's a case of eliminating silos. It's a way of rethinking how we structure our entire organization in order to take advantage of opportunities. I'll give you a really quick example. Software development in some organizations is getting rid of project management because it's getting rid of projects. It's saying, hey, with the onset of continuous delivery, with the ability to deliver functionality into a solution continuously, we don't have to arbitrarily package these as projects anymore. Instead, we'll have permanent agile teams. We'll call the project manager a product manager. We'll call the functionality that these teams deliver a product instead of a project. And every time they finish a sprint, or sometimes more frequently than that, they'll release something into the production environment. And this goes on and on and on. It's an evolution of project management. It's nothing to be scared of. It's just an evolving organization. And that's the kind of thing that's going to continue to happen in the future. In order for that to be successful, there has to be alignment of everything. If you're not all pulling in the same direction, then somebody's acting as a drag or an anchor or a brake. They're slowing you down. They're allowing your competitors to go faster, to gain advantage over you. So every single part of the organization has to be aligned, and the investments that you make have to be optimal, not just on the day you make the decision to do that investment, but every single day afterwards as the world evolves. And of course, you have to make sure you're consistently improving your long-term financial performance through a focus on achieving business value. And that business value is just as important in terms of customer and environment as it is in terms of the pure dollars up front. Those drive long-term financial performance. So how do you make it happen? Well, I said to Rachel yesterday when we were just reviewing this, you could almost sort of drop this slide into any kind of change. There's nothing fundamental here. At the top, it's about recognizing that you have a change to make, committing to it, making the investment, and then adjusting as you go. You've all seen variations of this at different times for all of the different initiatives or change management projects that you've been involved in. But just to drill down a little bit more, when we talk about recognize that today's situation is not good enough. It doesn't matter how good you are, there is room to improve. Recognize how important it is to have a strategic, adaptive, top-down investment management strategy, and recognize that projects, especially strategic projects, are really all about investment management, not just project management. and recognize just how fast things are moving in your industry. Because even if you're a traditional conservative firm in a traditional conservative industry, things are changing more rapidly than you're probably comfortable with. In fact, maybe especially if you're in those industries. When you're ready, commit, truly commit. You can't be a little bit invested or half invested in this stuff. So make a commitment to adaptively adaptively manage your investments. So treat it like a financial portfolio. Kill the initiatives that aren't working, replace them with something else. Cut your losses, maximize your returns. Make sure that everything is being driven from the top. Decisions are being made for strategic reasons, not tactical reasons. And when you have to make a decision, make it quickly. Don't get bogged down in analysis paralysis because suddenly you'll find yourself behind the 8 ball. When you do invest, make sure you're investing in the right people doing the right things. Train people, replace people, find the solutions that you need for today's world because it's different than existed 3 years ago. Make sure you're investing in the right support tools and infrastructure. This is critical. Rachel's going to talk a little bit about Keyed in just a moment. But if you don't have the right support tools and infrastructure in place, you're never going to be able to do this. Do you really think spreadsheets are going to allow you to deliver agile portfolio management? It's not going to happen. PowerPoint is not the right tool for doing real-time reporting. Good luck with that. You've got to have the right tool infrastructure there, and it needs to be integrated. And then obviously invest in continuously improving, because if you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards. And then recognize that as soon as you make those investments, as soon as you make those commitments, as soon as you've identified the problems, something's going to change and it's all wrong. So you have to adjust as soon as you possibly can, but not before. As much as you need to, but no more than that. And without hesitating, but looking before you leap. Because you have to make sure that it's smart adjustments, not knee-jerk changes. And that's the thing I want to leave you with on this. So with that said, I will hand back to Rachel. Now, I know Rachel's having a few challenges with the technical sort of moving the screen along. So we're going to try and get her to do that. And if that doesn't work, she'll ask me to move the slides, but I'm sure we'll make this work. So Rachel, it's all yours. Take over.
Perfect. Thank you, Andy. Great information and takeaways to consider. I'm sure the audience is nodding their head at a lot of the things that you said. For those who may not be familiar with Keyed in is a project portfolio management solution for PMOs, embedded services teams, and global business transformation. Keyed in has recently been awarded by Gartner a 2019 Customer Choice Award in the PPM solution category. Keyed in allows PMOs to reinvest up to 20% of their portfolio's value and improve speed of reporting by 50%. We pride ourselves on being a customer-focused organization that offers a personalized customer service and support approach to build lasting partnerships with our customers. And Andy, there we go. Here are some screenshots of our project portfolio management solution that highlight portfolio level planning capabilities within our tool that align the PMO to the goals of the business, like Andy talked about today. From strategic planning and prioritization, a Kanban view of the portfolio, and capacity and demand planning capabilities to leverage data to drive those strategic decisions. And next slide, Andy, sorry. As Andy talked about, being agile in the portfolio environment is important to keep up with and adapt to changing demands. Keyed in allows you to communicate and collaborate on important project data, model scenarios, and track utilization in real time, and identify potential conflicts and create contingencies before things go wrong. Keyed in provides the tool needed to drive transformation. Lastly, Keyed in allows organizations to continuously improve, like Andy talked about today, make changes based on real-time portfolio analysis views, utilization and change updates, and the ability to track program management milestones with real-time dashboards designed to alleviate the headache that changing demands may cause when using traditional and manual approaches. With that said, let's get to your questions. If you do have a question, please feel free to submit those in the Q&A box. While you are submitting questions, I'm going to pop up one last poll question. If you are interested in learning more about Keyed In or want to see a personalized demonstration of our solution, please let us know by taking a few seconds to answer this final poll question. While you are doing that, I will pull up the questions we've received throughout the presentation, and we will get started with those in a moment.
The answer to the first question, Rachel, is 100% of people will say, yes, let's talk.
That's the hope. And we'll give everybody a couple more seconds here. Andy, I'm pulling up some of the questions we've received so far, and I will close the poll and we will get started with those questions.
Make them easy.
Hopefully we won't have any stumpers. What is the best practice for resource planning?
Oh, wow. Nice, easy one. All right. So the next hour and a half will be a discussion about the advantages of different approaches to resource planning. Okay. So best approach to resource planning. The answer, the stock answer I give whenever anybody says to me, what's the best process for this or best process for that, is always that the best one is the one that your organization believes in. But I recognize that that's a little bit of a canned answer. So let me try and sort of be a little bit more specific. I think that when it comes to resource planning, you have to think more globally, more widely, at a larger scale than most organizations tend to do, in two specific areas. Firstly, they don't tend to think long-term enough. Resource planning is not something you do. It's a short-term, oh, we need to fund this project or we need to resource this project. It's something that you should be thinking about constantly. Okay, if we're going to approve these projects to start 3 quarters from now, we think this is what we're going to be doing. We know it's going to change because the backlog will change. But what does that mean in terms of resourcing? What do we have in terms of the number of engineers, the number of developers, the number of whatever it might be? And more importantly, what's the lead time on getting more or on training people if they need new skills? That's what we need to be thinking about in terms of resource planning. We also need to be thinking that we don't just need resources to deliver a project. We change resourcing needs in the organization when that project delivers. Imagine an innovative new product. You obviously need a smart team of people to develop that product. But if it's brand new, if it's truly innovative, then the first thing that's going to happen is you've got to find a way to tell the market about just how different it is and just why customers should care. So you've got to train your salespeople and your marketing people to be able to get that message across. The likelihood is that in the first little while, you're going to have to support that product a little more than you expected. So you need more customer service people, or at least better trained, differently trained customer service people. You may need professional services people to get this into customers and help them make the most out of it. You need to be able to track the sales and financial performance. So there's changes happening within finance. So all of that operational production type of resource planning has to be considered. So think about that larger scale piece. In terms of specific projects, nothing fundamentally changes here. It's still about making sure the right people with the right skills are in the right place at the right time. I would encourage you to stop thinking in terms of project resource pools, because there's no such thing. An organization only has one resource pool. It's the employee base. If you add to the project resource pool, then all you're really doing is taking away from support or operations or some other part of the business. So think more sort of strategically around that. But the basics are still the same. Who's got the right skills? How do we get them? What is the impact if we move them to another project? That impact might be in a project or in an operational area, but then also thinking longer term and thinking larger scale in terms of the long-term strategic resource planning, resource management approach. I think if an organization starts thinking of resource planning and resource management as a truly strategic function, they'll go a long way to making a difference. So sorry, that was a rather broad and rather lengthy answer to the question, but I think that's a really critical piece.
Definitely. Thanks, Andy. One question we did get, and we mentioned this at the beginning actually, is how do I get PDUs for this presentation? Would you mind just answering that quick?
Sure. So this is a self-reporting PDU webinar. So there's no code you need for this. You just need to go to the CCRS section of the PMI website, which if you're a PMP or a CAPM or whatever the qualification is, you know where to get to that. And then enter this as one PDU. It's an hour long, so it's one PDU. And this is eligible under the strategy category of the talent triangle. So one PDU in the strategy section of the talent triangle on the CCRS section of the PMI website.
Perfect. Thanks, Andy. And then We did have a question come in too. What are the top messages to get buy-in from senior leadership?
I think that the first thing you need to do when you're talking to senior leadership about this or about anything for that matter is talk their language. This is something that project people tend to not be very good at, whether or not they're talking to executives or whether they're talking to the teams. They like to talk project management speak. And trust me, no one else cares about lead and lag. No one else cares about PERT. So speak the language of the business. If you're talking to leadership, if you're looking to get buy into this, talk language that they understand, talk about issues that they deal with all the time. So typically we'll be talking about financial return. We'll be talking about optimizing our resources. We'll be talking about gaining a strategic advantage over our competitors. We'll talk about managing and minimizing risk. We'll talk about compliance. We'll talk about all those things that are important to the executives. And at the end of the day, that's what project management should be about. It's not about delivering projects. It's about delivering business improvements through the successful execution of projects. And that's what we're doing. No one cares that we're delivering a product on time, on scope, and on budget. They care that we're delivering the ability to gain new customers, to delight the customers we've got, to increase our market share, to increase our profitability, to satisfy our shareholders and our investors more. That's what matters from this stuff. And that's how we should be talking to our executives. If you start talking to them in terms of improving the financial return on their project investments and do so in a meaningful way, then they'll listen and they'll be willing to invest in this kind of change.
Perfect. Thank you. We did have another question come in. How do you leverage resources when operating in a persistent team structure?
So this is an interesting approach. So this is the piece I was talking about around the shift from projects to products in software development, which is it's a really exciting development. It always gets a lot of questions coming up, and it's in its infancy. So there's still a lot of maturity to happen. But what you really need to consider there is a balance between fresh ideas, fresh innovation coming into the team, and stability. There's a lot of arguments to be said. And in fact, one of the principles of agile project delivery is that you should have stable teams, that you don't keep changing out people, that from one project to the next, a team stays together, because then they get to know how to leverage one another's skills and experience, and they work more effectively together. You've seen this yourselves. You know, when you work in a new team, as you become part of that team, as you get to know everybody, so performance levels increase. And you've all seen those J-curve graphs that sort of graph that out. But there comes a point where that plateaus. So you have to consider that there is a point in these persistent teams, in these permanent teams, where you're going to find that the level of improvement of performance is slowing down. And at that point, it's actually a nice time to bring in fresh blood, to bring in new team members, to take some of that experience and share it to less experienced parts of the business and give new or less experienced team members a chance to sort of become incorporated. That way, you're not only improving the performance of this permanent team by keeping new ideas and innovation coming in, but you're also sharing the experience that that team has gained across the rest of the organization, whether that's operations, support, traditional projects, or another permanent team, and actually improving the quality of the organization all the way through. So you have to consider it more as another strategic approach, another strategic investment in developing people, and then getting that experience and those skills shared across as much of the organization as possible. It's not an exact science. I can't tell you, well, leave them in place for 20 sprints and then change people out. It's not like that. But start understanding the performance of your teams and your individuals, and you'll recognize when it's time to make an adjustment.
Great, thanks, Andy. Adaptive investment sounds like a lack of strategy. How do we avoid losing focus on the long term?
I love it. Say what you mean, why don't you? I actually think that long-term strategy has never been more important, but we have to find a way that achieves that. So let me give you an example that's got absolutely nothing to do with projects. Suppose that you are trying to do a road trip from one side of the United States to another. So we'll start in Boston. We want to end up in San Diego. So we're not only going across country, we're going from top to bottom, or near enough to top. So If we're going to do that in a traditional way, we'll plan out our route, we'll decide where we're going to stop for the night, and then we'll drive. And we'll just drive for one day. We start at whatever time in the morning and we go for that evening. And we might get there without any problems, or we might hit all kinds of challenges. We might find that there's construction or there's an accident or whatever it might be. And in the old days, when, I all remember this, Rachel was way too young, but when we had to rely on paper maps to navigate, that was really the only choice we had, because we didn't really have any other way of knowing if there were problems ahead unless we happened to hear it on the radio. Nowadays, we've got cell phones, we've got smartphones, we've got GPS systems in our cars and adaptive navigation that can tell you if there's a problem ahead, if there's construction, or if there's been an accident, or if there's a backup because of heavy traffic. And you can make constant small adjustments. So you still know where you want to be. You want to get to San Diego, but you don't have to just drive in a straight line to the end of the day to whatever hotel you booked. You can make adjustments. Maybe you can rebook the hotel if you need to, just on the fly. But maybe you just sort of come off the highway for a couple of exits and take a side road, because that gets you past a bottleneck. And then you can join and adjust. You're continuously making small adjustments. That's really what we're talking about here, the importance of making those adjustments. But you never lose sight of the fact that the purpose of this trip is to go from Boston to San Diego. The purpose of an organization is to achieve its long-term strategic goals. How you do that will have to adjust in the relatively short term of a 1-year cycle or a quarterly delivery cycle. But the 5, 7, 10-year plan still has to remain in place, because otherwise you end up meandering, and it is a lack of strategy. You have to keep that long-term piece in place and make sure that the adjustments you're making are the right ones. But we're making more adjustments, and they're smaller scale than the traditional approach. Hope that makes sense.
I can still relate to the paper maps, just for the record.
No, you're way too young.
This is a little bit more specific, but how do you suggest the best way to manage portfolios when they are client contract work that has to be delivered? So, for example, the pipeline cannot be prioritized. Everything has to be resourced and then delivered.
Well, I would argue that the pipeline can definitely be prioritized. It just has to be prioritized earlier. When you're a services organization, you're essentially dealing with customer contracts or customer projects, then it becomes critically important to make sure you're doing the right work. It's easy if your projects are internal to just say, you know what, this was a bad idea, let's cancel it, let's move on. You can't do that when you've got a signed contract with the customer. So you have to make sure that you're signing the right contracts, you're pursuing the right opportunities, you're responding to the right RFPs. You absolutely can prioritize, but to do so, you need to get that prioritization process built in to how you go about finding clients. It's about understanding what you're good at, understanding where your strengths lie and pursuing those opportunities, understanding that the projects that historically you've lost money on and avoiding them, understanding the RFPs that you have the best chance of winning and avoiding the ones that are just going to consume a huge amount of resources and then be awarded to somebody else anyway. So yes, it's still important. Yes, it still applies. But instead of doing that as an internal planning function, you now have to do it more as external planning, for want of a better term. So you're involving your salespeople, your relationship managers, your CRM approach, your customer relationship management approach, has to consider that prioritization piece, because once you are committed, it's harder to get out of it. You can't just say, you know what, this isn't working, let's kill it off, because it's clearly a contractual commitment that you then have to meet.
Makes sense. Good advice there. This one's a little bit of a two-part question, but can you say more about the evolution of project management to product management? Does it still involve group initiatives into areas that align or make sense? And then there's a follow-up question with that.
So I told you that it was always a popular one, didn't I? It's something, yes, I mean, it's something that's still very new. It's something that is really, at this point in time, only applicable to software development. But if you are delivering a online or a hosted managed solution that doesn't need to be packaged and installed somewhere, then you have the ability to release new functionality or patches or fixes as frequently as you like. I know some organizations that will do releases 4, 5, 6 times a day. every day of the week because it makes sense to them. If that's the environment that you're in, you can apply that concept to any type of project. I don't care what kind of cross-department initiative it might be or anything else, but you have to make sure that the advantages you gain from doing so aren't disruptive elsewhere. If it's a brand new product that is being developed and you need to support it with training of people, with documentation, with all that kind of support stuff, you probably don't want to be getting something out there in the production environment and then changing it continuously until you've got some kind of stability in place. So think about whether it applies to your particular situation, but also recognize that it's an innovative new way of delivering incremental improvements to the right kind of work item. Let's not call it a project.
Perfect. And then this somewhat aligns to that, but how do you market those initiatives and gain buy-in to those naysayers? And then also, what if leadership doesn't think strategically?
Well, if you want to get buy-in from naysayers, or if you want to, which is, traditionally sponsors, stakeholders, executives, if they're not willing to have that conversation, start talking about the stuff they care about. Because I know we all like to think that our stakeholders, our executives don't know what they're doing. The truth is, I've never met one who didn't know what they were doing and didn't know what they wanted. They didn't always have the right kind of idea or the right kind of alignment, but that's because they were working on inaccurate or incomplete information. If we give the right information to our executive, our leadership, our sponsors, our stakeholders in the context that is relevant to them. So we don't just give them project reporting in the way that we want to report on projects. We give them project reporting in a way that they can understand: financial, customer success, whatever the variable might be for the particular projects you're dealing with. They will care and they will understand. They may not agree, but you'll be able to have a reasoned discussion as to why the approach that they want to take is different from the approach that you want to take, and you'll be speaking the same language. Otherwise, as a friend of mine likes to say, you end up with conversations where duck doesn't talk very well to chicken, because you're not speaking the same language. There's an analogy for you.
Perfect. I like it. We did get a question about if Keaton's going to have more Agile Portfolio Management content coming. If you are interested in kind of keeping up with Keaton has coming up, you can subscribe to our monthly newsletter in the link that I just put in the chat. So hopefully we have some people that are interested in keeping up with what we've got to share.
Cool.
I'm just waiting to see if there's any last minute questions that pop in. Give it a few seconds here.
The suspense is killing me.
I know.
We've got a couple of minutes left if there's one more question to come.
It looks like we're gonna give people a couple more minutes back in their day.
Well,
so thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, Andy, for those key insights around Agile Portfolio Management. Hot topic right now for sure. As I stated earlier, the recording and the slides will be sent to you within 24 hours, so keep an eye out for those in your inbox or your junk folder, as sometimes they might be hiding in there as well. If you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, we hope to see you on some of our future webinars. But in the meantime, have a good day and a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.